Welcome to Discover Before Sleep channel. The ground we walk on today once belonged to a world that defied the limits of imagination. They weren't just giant monsters. They were the absolute rulers of a planet. How did this magnificent empire, which thrived for millions of years, vanish in seconds with a fire from the sky? Before we dive into this epic journey, please don't forget to subscribe to support the channel, like the video, and share your comments. If you're ready, the true story of the giants begins. The air of the ancient world does not smell like our own. It is heavy, thick with the scent of crushed ferns, damp earth, and a metallic tang that lingers after a summer storm. To understand the giants that would one day rule this planet, we must first travel back to a time when they did not exist, a time of transition, where the Earth was a vast, unified stage waiting for its lead actors. Imagine a world where all the land we know today was fused into a single, colossal continent called Pangaea. There were no separate Americas, no isolated Australia, and no frozen Antarctica. Instead, there was a relentless, unbroken horizon of red earth and jagged mountains, surrounded by a global ocean so vast it seemed to swallow the very sun at dusk. In this distant era, the climate was a fever dream of extremes. The interior of the great landmass was a desert of shimmering heat, where the wind carved ripples into dunes that stretched for 1,000 miles. Rain was a rare mercy, arriving in seasonal monsoons that turned dry ravines into roaring, muddy torrents. Life in this world was a slow, patient game of survival. Before the dinosaurs, the land was dominated by creatures that looked like echoes of things we might recognize today, yet they were fundamentally different. There were sprawling reptiles with heavy, barrel-shaped bodies that hugged the ground, their legs jutting out from their sides like the oars of a boat. They moved with a slow, side-to-side waddle, their bellies often brushing against the hot dust. These were the ancestors and the cousins, the pioneers of a dry world. They lived in a landscape of strange, prehistoric flora, shaggy cycads with stiff, waxy leaves and towering horsetails that hissed in the breeze. There were no flowers yet, no bright petals to catch the eye, no sweet fragrance to fill the air. The world was a palette of deep greens, rusty browns, and the pale gray of volcanic ash. In the shadows of the ferns, the first hints of a revolution were stirring. The air was filled with the drone of giant insects, and in the waterways, sleek, toothy predators waited for anything small enough to stumble. But the climate was shifting. The Earth was breathing through a long, slow cycle of warming and drying. Deep beneath the crust, the great tectonic plates were beginning to groan, preparing for a slow-motion breakup that would take millions of years. This was an era of great testing. To survive here, an animal had to be efficient. It had to find water where there seemed to be none and endure a sun that beat down with unforgiving intensity. As the lush coastal fringes gave way to the harshness of the interior, the sprawling reptiles began to struggle. Their heavy frames and slow metabolisms were becoming a burden in a world that demanded speed and endurance. The ecosystem was a delicate balance of shadows and light. Every morning, as the sun climbed over the jagged peaks of the interior mountains, the cold-blooded inhabitants of the plains would crawl onto flat stones, tilting their bodies to catch the first golden rays. They needed the sun to ignite their inner engines, to give them the strength to hunt or to forage. Without it, they were sluggish, vulnerable to the few predators that had begun to develop more efficient ways of staying warm. This was the Great Dying's aftermath, a period of recovery where life was reclaiming the scorched earth. The plants were evolving too, developing deeper roots and hardier seeds to withstand the long droughts. In the rivers, the water was often thick with silt, hiding fish with armored scales and lungs that allowed them to gulp air when the pools grew stagnant. As we watch this world, we see the first whispers of the dinosaurian form. Not in the giants, but in the small, lithe shadows darting between the roots of the tree ferns. These were creatures built for a different kind of movement. They didn't sprawl. They tucked their legs beneath their bodies, standing tall and ready to spring. They were the outliers, the marginalized survivors of a changing climate. While the heavy-set rulers of the Triassic sunned themselves on the rocks, these small, agile newcomers were finding success in the margins. They were learning to run, to breathe more deeply, and to sustain their energy for longer periods. They were the product of a world that was becoming more competitive, more demanding. The soundscape of this time was a low-frequency hum. The wind through the needles of primitive conifers, the distant rumble of a volcano waking up on the horizon, and the occasional splash of a predator in a shrinking lake. There were no bird songs, no mammalians scurrying in the leaf litter. It was a world of scales and stillness. But the stillness was an illusion. Underneath the surface, the chemistry of the atmosphere was changing. Carbon dioxide levels fluctuated, and the very composition of the soil was being reworked by the first true forests. This was the laboratory of evolution, a place where nature was tinkering with the blueprints of bone and muscle. The sprawling gate that had served life for millions of years was reaching its limit. A new design was needed, a design that would allow an animal to grow larger, move faster, and travel further than ever before. As the sun sets over the red plains of Pangaea, casting long, violet shadows across the dunes, we sense a shift in the wind. The age of the early reptiles is drawing to a close, not with a bang, but with a slow fading of their dominance. They are being outpaced by a lineage of creatures that have unlocked the secret of efficient movement. These are the ancestors of the dinosaurs, small and unassuming, yet carrying within them the potential to reshape the planet. They watch from the undergrowth as the old world wobbles. They are the heirs to a kingdom that hasn't yet been built. The stars come out over a silent world, shining down on a continent that will soon see the rise of the most magnificent creatures to ever walk the earth. The stage is set, the lights are low, and the first act of the dinosaurian epic is about to begin. The Golden Age did not begin with a roar. It began with a quiet footfall in the undergrowth. As the Triassic period deepened, the world was a patchwork of harsh contrasts, a landscape where survival was a prize won only by the most adaptable. The great continent of Pangaea was still a single, sprawling mass of land, but the life upon it was beginning to flicker with a new kind of energy. In the shadows of the towering, spear-like conifers and the dense thickets of ferns, a new lineage was emerging. These were the first true dinosaurs, and in their early days, they were not the masters of their domain. They were the underdogs, the small, nimble opportunists living in the peripheral spaces of a world ruled by much larger, more established predators. To look at them then, you would never have guessed that their descendants would one day shake the very foundations of the earth with their weight. These early pioneers were modest in size, many no larger than a modern wolf or a small deer. They moved with a grace that was entirely new to the planet. Unlike the heavy, sprawling reptiles that had come before them, these creatures stood upright, their limbs positioned directly beneath their torsos. This seemingly simple shift in posture was a revolution in biological engineering. It allowed them to breathe more easily while running, breaking the ancient constraint that forced a crawling reptile to hold its breath as its body flexed from side to side. Because they could breathe and move simultaneously, they possessed a well of stamina that their rivals could not match. They were the endurance runners of the Triassic, able to outlast their prey and outrun their enemies across the sun-baked plains. Imagine one of these early travelers, a creature like a silver shadow moving through the dawn mist. Its skin might have been a mosaic of fine scales, perhaps even brushed with the first soft hints of fuzzy filaments to keep in its body heat during the cool desert nights. Its eyes were large and keen, catching the first light of a sun that rose over a world of red dust and green oasis. It moved with a bird-like twitchiness, its long, stiff tail acting as a counterweight, allowing it to pivot and turn with a precision that was almost liquid. This was the dawn of a new kind of intelligence, too. A sensory world where hearing was sharper and reactions were faster. These dinosaurs were built for a world of high stakes, where a single misstep meant becoming a meal for the giant, crocodile-like predators that lurked in the riverbeds. The rivers of this time were dangerous places. Huge, armored amphibians with heads shaped like toilet seats lay submerged in the mud, waiting for anything to approach the water's edge. On the banks, the archosaurs, the ruling reptiles that were the cousins of the dinosaurs, held the position of top predators. They were massive, muscular, and terrifying, often covered in bony plates. Beside them, the first dinosaurs seemed fragile, almost delicate. But the dinosaurs had a secret advantage. They were incredibly efficient at processing food and water. Their metabolisms were likely faster than the cold-blooded giants around them, allowing them to remain active during the heat of the day or the chill of the evening when others grew sluggish. They were the ultimate generalists, eating insects, small lizards, and the succulent shoots of new plants. Life for these early dinosaurs was a constant exercise in vigilance. They lived in small social groups, perhaps finding safety in numbers as they navigated the labyrinth of the Triassic forests. The sound of their world was the dry rustle of wind through horsetails and the occasional high-pitched chirp or hiss used to signal danger to their kin. They were part of a grand experiment in ecology. As the climate fluctuated, shifting between seasons of extreme drought and violent, flooding rains, the dinosaurs' ability to travel long distances in search of resources gave them an edge. While the larger, more specialized reptiles were tied to specific watering holes or prey, the dinosaurs were explorers, pushing into new territories and colonizing the vast interiors of the continent. The vegetation they moved through was a strange gallery of ancient plants. There were no broadleaf trees as we know them. Instead, the canopy was formed by ginkgos with their fan-shaped leaves and tall, spindly seed ferns. The ground was a carpet of mosses and low-growing shrubs that crackled underfoot. In this environment, the dinosaurs' nimble hands, some still possessing 5 fingers, were perfect for grasping and pulling at the foliage. They were becoming masters of their surroundings through subtlety rather than strength. Their evolution was a slow burn, a gradual accumulation of small advantages that, over millions of years, would coalesce into an unstoppable force. As the millions of years drifted by like clouds over the Pangaean sky, the world began to change in ways that favored the small and the swift. A series of minor extinction events began to thin the ranks of the older, more cumbersome reptiles. Volcanic activity increased as the continent began to feel the first internal stresses of pulling apart, releasing gases that altered the atmosphere. In this shifting world, the dinosaurs didn't just survive, they thrived. They began to diversify, their bodies twisting into new shapes to fill the gaps left by the dying lineages. Some grew longer necks to reach the higher branches, while others developed stronger jaws to tackle tougher prey. The transition was so gradual it would have been invisible to any observer watching at the time. It was a victory of the mundane over the spectacular. While the giant, toothy archosaurs stayed the same, locked into their roles as heavyweight hunters, the dinosaurs were nimble enough to change with the planet. They were the quiet revolutionaries, refining the mechanics of the hip, the curve of the neck, and the structure of the lung. By the end of the Triassic, the stage was being cleared. The great ruling reptiles were fading into the fossil record, leaving behind a world that was suddenly, remarkably open. The stars that looked down on the late Triassic saw a planet in the grip of a transformation. The red deserts were still there, and the monsoons still carved deep scars into the earth. But the silhouettes moving across the moonlit dunes were different now. They were taller, more upright, and more confident. The era of the underdog was over. The foundations had been laid, the design had been perfected, and the blueprints for the greatest empire in the history of life were complete. The quiet rise was about to become a deafening crescendo. As the first true dinosaurs settled into the nests they had built in the safety of the highlands, the world held its breath, waiting for the giants to wake. To understand why the dinosaurs inherited the Earth, we must look past their size and their teeth and peer into the very architecture of their bodies. Their success was not a stroke of luck, but a masterpiece of biological engineering that set them apart from every other creature that had ever walked the land. The secret lay in the way they stood. If you look at a lizard or a crocodile, you see a body suspended between 4 legs that sprawl outward, like a bridge hanging between its pillars. To move, these animals must swing their bodies in a wide, rhythmic curve, a motion that is effective but exhausting. Every step requires a surge of energy to lift the trunk off the ground, and as the ribs compress with each turn, the lungs find it difficult to draw in air. They are prisoners of a design that demands a choice between moving and breathing deeply. The dinosaurs broke this ancient law. Through a slow, elegant shift in the geometry of the hip, their legs moved from the sides of their bodies to directly underneath them. It was as if the pillars of the bridge had been tucked inward to support the weight from below. This transition changed everything. Suddenly, The skeleton became a vertical column of support, allowing the animal to grow larger and heavier without collapsing under the crushing pull of gravity. More importantly, it freed the torso. As a dinosaur ran, its chest remained stable, and its lungs could expand and contract with perfect freedom. They had unlocked a fountain of stamina. They could travel miles where others could only manage yards. They could chase where others had to wait. They could explore the vast, open heart of the continent because their bodies were no longer at war with the air they breathed. This change in posture was accompanied by a transformation of the feet and ankles. The ancestors of the dinosaurs began to walk on their toes, much like a modern bird or a dog, effectively lengthening their legs and giving them a spring-like quality. Each step was an exercise in efficiency, reclaiming energy with every stride. Their bones, too, were changing. Instead of the dense, heavy bone of their cousins, dinosaurs began to develop skeletons that were light yet incredibly strong. In many lineages, these bones were hollowed out, filled with a complex system of air sacs that acted like a secondary set of lungs. This internal plumbing didn't just make them lighter. It turned their entire bodies into a highly efficient cooling and oxygen-gathering machine. They were living bellows, moving air through their systems in a continuous loop, a feat of plumbing that allowed them to sustain levels of activity that would have burned out a sprawling reptile in minutes. Beneath the scales and the skin, the very furnace of their life was burning hotter. For a long time, we imagined these animals as slow, sluggish creatures that relied on the morning sun to wake them up. But modern science whispers a different story, one of a metabolism that was vibrant and flexible. They likely possessed a warm-blooded nature, or perhaps something even more sophisticated, a way of maintaining a high, steady body temperature regardless of the weather. This internal heat was the engine of their dominance. It meant they didn't have to wait for the sun to rise to begin their day. They could move in the cool of the dawn, hunt in the chill of a forest shadow, and survive in the high latitudes where the nights were long and frosty. They were the first true masters of the clock, reclaiming the hours that the cold-blooded world had lost to the shadows. Their hips, the very pivot of their existence, divided them into two great families, a subtle difference in the orientation of the bones that would direct the course of their evolution for 100 million years. One group kept a hip structure that resembled their reptilian ancestors, while the other developed a layout that looked remarkably like the birds we see today. This wasn't just a quirk of anatomy. It was a roadmap for how they would interact with their world. It influenced how they balanced, how they swung their tails, and how they eventually specialized into the long-necked titans and the armored tanks of the later ages. The tail itself became a vital tool, not a dragging weight, but a dynamic counterweight that allowed them to balance on two legs, freeing their hands to grasp, to claw, or to gather. When you combine this upright stance, the lightened skeleton, the efficient lungs, and the internal furnace, you have the most successful design for a land animal in the history of our planet. It was a blueprint that allowed for endless variation. Because the weight was carried so efficiently, the head could grow large, or the neck could grow long, or the body could be draped in heavy armor without sacrificing the ability to move. They were biological chameleons, capable of stretching into any shape the environment demanded. While other groups of animals were locked into their niches, the dinosaurs were a fluid, evolving force, a lineage that had found a way to bypass the limits of bone and breath. This was the quiet revolution that happened in the shadows of the Triassic. It wasn't about being the biggest or the loudest, not yet. It was about being the most refined. As the world continued to change, as the forests grew thicker and the competition for food intensified, these anatomical secrets gave the dinosaurs an invisible shield. They were simply better at being alive. They could find more food with less effort, survive harsher conditions with more resilience, and produce more offspring with greater frequency. The dinosaurian way was a new philosophy of movement and energy, and as the Jurassic period dawned, the Earth was about to see just how far that design could be pushed. The pioneers had finished their work. The architects had perfected the plan. Now, it was time for the giants to claim their inheritance. As the world transitioned into the lush, humid embrace of the Jurassic, the dinosaur lineage reached a fork in the road, a monumental split that would define the rhythm of life for the next 100 million years. This was the birth of two distinct philosophies of survival: the path of the hunter and the path of the harvester. The earth was no longer a place for the jack of all trades. To thrive in an increasingly crowded and competitive landscape, the dinosaurs began to specialize, honing their bodies into precision instruments designed for very different ends. It was a separation written in their teeth, their jaws, and the very chemistry of their stomachs. On one side of the divide were the theropods, the beast-footed ones. These were the predators, the animals that chose the path of high-octane energy and sensory sharpness. Their evolution was a pursuit of the ultimate weapon. They remained largely bipedal, keeping their weight centered over their powerful hind legs to maintain the speed and agility necessary for the chase. Their hands, freed from the duty of walking, became tools of the trade, clutching, raking, and pinning. But it was in the skull where the most terrifying refinements occurred. Their teeth became serrated knives, curved backward so that the more a prey animal struggled, the deeper the blades sank. Their jaws were engineered not just for a simple bite, but for a complex series of mechanical actions that could slice through muscle and snap bone with surgical efficiency. The hunters lived a life of intense bursts of action followed by long periods of watchful stillness. Their eyes moved toward the front of their heads, granting them the gift of depth perception, the ability to judge exactly how many heartbeats it would take to close the distance between themselves and a meal. This life of the mind and the senses required a vast amount of fuel. They were the fires of the ancient world, burning through energy at a rate that kept them constantly on the move, constantly searching. Every curve of their sleek, muscular bodies was a testament to the cost of eating meat. They were the architects of fear, and their presence ensured that no other creature in the Jurassic could ever afford to be complacent. On the other side of the divide, a very different kind of miracle was taking place. This was the rise of the plant eaters, the giants who would eventually turn the green world into a vast, self-sustaining engine of growth. Eating plants is, in many ways, much harder than eating meat. Leaves and stems are tough, fibrous, and guarded by chemical defenses. They contain little energy compared to muscle. To solve this, the herbivores took the path of the factory. They began to grow larger, developing massive digestive tracts that could act as fermentation vats, breaking down the stubborn cellulose of the Jurassic flora. Their teeth changed from knives into grindstones or pegs, designed to strip leaves from branches or crush tough vegetation into a pulp. These two paths created a grand, sweeping dance of evolution. As the hunters grew faster and more lethal, the plant eaters grew larger and more formidable. It was a biological arms race that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible. The plant eaters began to experiment with the sheer scale of their bodies, realizing that size itself was a potent defense. A predator might have the sharpest teeth in the world, but they are of little use if the target is a mountain of flesh and bone 10 times its size. To support this mounting weight, many of the herbivores returned to walking on all 4 legs, their limbs thickening into sturdy, tree-like columns. They became the heavy heavyweights of the plains, moving in slow, rhythmic processions through the forests. The relationship between these two groups shaped the very landscape of the earth. The herbivores were the gardeners of the prehistoric world. By consuming vast quantities of vegetation, they cleared the undergrowth, spread seeds, and thinned the forests, allowing new life to take root. The predators, in turn, were the regulators. They kept the herds moving, preventing any one area from being overgrazed and ensuring that only the strongest and healthiest survived to pass on their traits. It was a balance of incredible complexity, a tapestry woven from the threads of hunger and survival. Inside the bodies of these animals, the chemistry of life was divergent. The meat-eaters possessed short, efficient digestive systems designed for rapid absorption of protein, while the plant-eaters evolved internal landscapes of staggering complexity. Some swallowed stones, keeping them in a muscular gizzard to tumble and grind the food they couldn't chew, a rhythmic clacking sound emanating from their bellies as they walked. They were living mills, turning the sunlight captured by plants into the raw power of dinosaurian life. As the sun set over the Jurassic horizon, it illuminated a world that had become a masterpiece of specialization. In the deepening shadows, a small, feathered hunter might be seen testing the wind, its mind a map of nearby scents and sounds. A mile away, a group of long-necked giants would be settling for the night, their enormous hearts beating like drums, pumping blood through necks that reached for the stars. The two paths had led them to different destinies, yet they remained inextricably linked. They were the twin pillars of a new world order, the meat and the leaf, the tooth and the stone. The stage was now fully populated, and the drama of the Age of Giants was ready to begin in earnest. The silence of the Middle Jurassic is broken by a sound that is felt rather than heard, a low-frequency vibration that ripples through the soles of the feet and shimmers across the surface of the forest pools. This is the footfall of the titans, the sauropods, the largest animals to ever walk the dry earth. To see them is to witness a defiance of the very laws of physics. They are cathedrals of flesh and bone, moving with a slow, hypnotic deliberation that suggests they exist on a different timeline than the frantic, smaller creatures scurrying beneath their shadows. These were the long-necked giants, animals that took the path of the harvester to its ultimate, breathtaking conclusion. At the heart of their success was a body designed like a suspension bridge. Their forelegs were no longer mere limbs, but massive vertical columns, dense and sturdy, positioned directly under the weight of the torso to act as pillars of support. Their feet were padded with thick cushions of fatty tissue, much like an elephant's, which acted as shock absorbers for the tons of pressure exerted with every stride. But the true marvel was the neck. In some species, it stretched out like a living crane, 10, 20, or even 30 feet from the body. This neck was not a heavy burden. It was a masterpiece of weight-saving engineering. The vertebrae were hollowed out, honeycomb-like structures filled with air sacs that made the bones as light as balsa wood without sacrificing their strength. These air sacs were part of a continuous, one-way breathing system that allowed the animal to gather oxygen with incredible efficiency, fueling a body the size of a city block. For these giants, life was a continuous, slow-motion feast. They did not chew their food. They had no time for such a luxury. Instead, their heads were small, acting as simple intake valves. Equipped with peg-like or spoon-shaped teeth, they would rake through the canopies of conifers and ginkgos, stripping away bushels of needles and leaves in a single pass. This raw material was swallowed whole, traveling down the long highway of the throat to a stomach that served as a gargantuan fermentation vat. Inside, billions of bacteria worked to break down the tough plant fibers, generating immense internal heat in the process. A sauropod was, in essence, a living power plant, processing hundreds of pounds of greenery every single day to maintain its colossal frame. Being this large brought with it a unique set of challenges and triumphs. Because of their sheer mass, adult sauropods were virtually immune to the predators of their time. A hunter would no more think of attacking a healthy adult than a wolf would think of attacking a mountain. This size also acted as a thermal blanket. Once these animals warmed up, they stayed warm, their massive bodies retaining heat with such efficiency that they maintained a stable internal temperature regardless of the weather. However, the heart had to be a marvel of power, a muscular pump capable of driving blood all the way up the long incline of the neck to reach the brain. To keep the pressure from bursting the delicate vessels when the animal lowered its head to drink, they likely possessed a complex system of valves and bypasses, a biological plumbing system of unparalleled sophistication. The world they moved through was transformed by their presence. A herd of sauropods was a force of nature, a slow-moving earthquake that cleared paths through the densest forests. They were the architects of the landscape, creating clearings where new plants could grow and leaving behind massive deposits of fertilizer that enriched the soil. They lived in a world of high-altitude vistas, seeing over the tops of the trees to the horizons beyond. Their social lives were likely measured in deep, rumbling vocalizations that could travel for miles through the humid air, sounds far below the range of human hearing that allowed them to stay in contact across the vast Jurassic floodplains. But this life of grandeur began in total humility. These giants started as eggs no larger than a grapefruit. The journey from a tiny, vulnerable hatchling to a 60-ton titan was the most dramatic growth spurt in the history of life. In their first years, they grew with terrifying speed, hidden in the dense undergrowth to avoid the eyes of predators. They were the survivors of a brutal numbers game, where only 1 in 1,000 might reach the safety of adulthood. But once they achieved that critical mass, the world became theirs. They moved in rhythmic, undulating lines across the terrain, their tails, often ending in thin, whip-like tips, trailing behind them like the wake of a ship. As the sun sets on the age of giants, their silhouettes dominate the sky, their necks reaching up toward the first stars to snatch at the highest, most succulent growth. They were the ultimate expression of what the dinosaurian body could achieve when gravity was mastered and the green world provided an endless supply of fuel. They were not mistakes or evolutionary dead ends. They were the pinnacle of their era, a testament to the power of a design that turned a simple plant eater into a living monument. To watch them move was to see the Earth itself coming to life, a slow, majestic procession that would endure for tens of millions of years, defining the very meaning of the word dinosaur. While the giants claimed the canopies, the shadows between the trees belonged to a different kind of master. These were the theropods, the hunters of the ancient world, and they were the most sophisticated biological machines of their time. If the long-necked giants were the mountains of the Jurassic, the meat-eaters were the wind, unseen until they struck, unpredictable, and possessed of a frightening, focused intelligence. They were the architects of movement, their every bone and tendon refined for the singular purpose of the chase. To walk through the dense, fern-choked forests of the prehistoric era was to be watched by eyes that saw in the dark, and to be scented by nostrils that could pick up a single drop of blood from a mile away. The design of a hunter is a lesson in economy and lethality. They remained on two legs, a choice that gave them a height advantage and freed their arms for the strike. Their feet were tipped with three main toes, each ending in a curved, keratin-sheathed claw that gripped the earth like a track spike. Their movement was not a heavy trudge, but a balanced, rhythmic glide. As they moved, their long tails were held stiff and horizontal, acting as a dynamic rudder. When a hunter turned a corner at full speed, that tail swung in the opposite direction, preventing a wipeout and allowing for a level of agility that would baffle a modern elephant or rhino. They were the first creatures to truly master the art of the high-speed pursuit in a crowded environment. But a predator is more than just legs and claws. It is a brain designed for strategy. We often think of dinosaurs as dim-witted, but the hunters were a different breed. Their brain-to-body ratio was significantly higher than that of their prey. They possessed large optic lobes for keen vision and massive olfactory bulbs for an incredible sense of smell. They lived in a world of invisible maps, reading the chemical trails left by the herds, the humidity of the air, and the subtle sounds of a distant struggle. Some evidence suggests that many of these predators were not the lone wolves we once imagined. In the silence of the forest, they may have moved in small, coordinated groups, using vocalizations and body language to flush prey toward a waiting ambush. Imagine the terror of a plant eater, realizing too late that the rustle in the ferns was not one hunter, but a team working in lethal harmony. Their weapons were as varied as the landscapes they inhabited. Some hunters were built for the bite and slice method, possessing blade-like teeth with serrated edges that worked like steak knives. They didn't need to crush bone. They simply had to inflict deep, bleeding wounds and wait for the prey to weaken. Others were built for the grip and rip, with thick, robust teeth and powerful neck muscles designed to hold on to a struggling victim until the end. Their jaws were not rigid boxes but were often hinged in multiple places, allowing the skull to flex and absorb the shock of a violent struggle without breaking. This was a biological shock absorption system that allowed them to take down animals much larger than themselves. In the cool of the evening, the hunters would congregate near the game trails. They were masters of the wait. A large theropod could stand perfectly still for hours, its camouflaged skin blending into the dappled light of the conifer groves, its breathing slow and shallow. This patience was a testament to their high metabolism. They could afford to wait because when the moment came, they could explode into action with a burst of energy that no cold-blooded animal could hope to match. This warm-blooded nature meant they were active even in the dead of night or the chill of a mountain winter, giving them a 24-hour window of dominance. The life of a hunter was not one of constant victory, however. It was a life of scars and high stakes. Every hunt carried the risk of a broken bone or a debilitating injury. A single kick from a panicked herbivore could end a predator's career. We see this in the fossils, the story of lives lived on the edge, with ribs that have broken and healed, and skulls marked by the teeth of rivals. They fought for territory, for mates, and for the right to feast. Their social hierarchies were likely complex and brutal, governed by displays of color, sound, and raw power. As the Jurassic gave way to the Cretaceous, these hunters continued to evolve, getting smarter, faster, and more specialized. They were the pressure that forced the rest of the world to change. Because of the hunters, the plant eaters grew bigger, developed armor, and moved in herds. The theropods were the invisible hand that guided the direction of life, a constant reminder that in the ancient world, energy was the only currency that mattered. As the moon rose over the prehistoric plains, the low, guttural growl of a hunter would signal the start of the night's work, a reminder that while the giants might rule the day, the shadows always belonged to the beast-footed. In the final act of the Dinosaurian Empire, the Earth bore witness to the arrival of a creature that would become the very definition of a prehistoric king. To walk through the humid, late afternoon sun of a Cretaceous forest was to live in a world governed by the presence of a single name, Tyrannosaurus rex. This was not merely a larger version of the hunters that had come before. It was a radical reimagining of what a predator could be. As we look at this animal, we must strip away the myths of the mindless monster and see instead a masterpiece of evolutionary focus. A 6-ton athlete with the senses of a hawk and the crushing power of a tectonic plate. The physical design of the king was a study in paradox. At first glance, the eyes are drawn to the massive, boxy skull, a structure that seems almost too heavy for the neck to carry. But this skull was a marvel of weight-saving arches and reinforced bone, designed to house the most powerful bite in the history of land animals. Unlike the blade-like teeth of its predecessors, the teeth of a Tyrannosaurus were shaped like serrated bananas, thick, deep-rooted, and incredibly strong. They were not built just to cut flesh. They were built to explode through bone. When those jaws snapped shut, they delivered a pressure that could turn a ribcage into splinters, allowing the king to access the rich, calorie-dense marrow that other hunters had to leave behind. To support such a devastating weapon, the rest of the body was built for stability and explosive power. The neck was a thick, muscular S-curve, acting as a biological shock absorber that could pull and twist with the force of a crane. The tiny, two-fingered arms, often the subject of modern humor, were in reality anchored by massive chest muscles. While they couldn't reach the mouth, they were likely used to pin a struggling prey animal close to the body, or perhaps to help the giant push itself off the ground after a deep sleep. Every ounce of this animal's weight was centered over its hips, balanced by a heavy, stiff tail that acted as a precision rudder. Despite its immense size, the king moved with a terrifyingly efficient gait, its long, bird-like legs capable of covering vast distances with a rhythmic, ground-shaking stride. But the true secret of the Tyrannosaurus lay not in its muscle, but in its mind. When we look inside the brain case of a king, we find a sensory world that was shockingly sophisticated. The olfactory bulbs, the part of the brain dedicated to smell, were enormous. A Tyrannosaurus lived in a world of vivid chemical colors, able to track a herd from miles away or locate a hidden carcass through the thickest forest canopy. Its eyes, as large as grapefruits, were positioned forward, granting it binocular vision and depth perception that surpassed even modern birds of prey. It saw the world in high-definition 3D, able to judge the exact distance and speed of a fleeing triceratops with uncanny accuracy. Its hearing was tuned to low-frequency vibrations, the kind of deep, rumbling sounds made by the footsteps of distant giants, allowing it to feel the landscape long before it saw it. The life of a Tyrannosaurus was a journey of incredible transformation. They began as leggy, feathered juveniles, built for speed and high-activity hunting. In their youth, they were the narrow-gauge predators, chasing down smaller, swifter prey that the heavy adults couldn't hope to catch. As they aged, their bodies underwent a massive shift. Their legs thickened, their skulls widened, and they traded the agility of a sprinter for the raw, crushing power of a tank. This suggests a complex social structure where the young may have acted as flushers, driving prey toward the hidden, waiting ambush of the massive adults. They were not just solitary ghosts. They were the heads of a lineage that dominated every stage of the ecological ladder. Watching a Tyrannosaurus in its natural habitat was an exercise in tension. It was an animal of patient, calculated movement. It would spend hours in the dappled shadows of the redwood forests, its mottled skin providing a perfect camouflage against the ancient bark. When it moved, it was with a silent, heavy grace, its padded feet muffling the impact of its weight. The air around it seemed to grow still, as if the rest of the forest was holding its breath. When the strike finally came, it was not a long, drawn-out chase, but a sudden, violent explosion of power. A few massive strides, a lunging snap of the jaws, and the struggle was over. The king was also a survivor. Many fossils show us individuals that lived through horrific injuries, broken ribs, massive infections, and even the bite marks of other tyrannosaurs on their faces. These were tough, resilient animals that healed from wounds that would have killed a lesser creature. They fought one another for territory and mates, engaged in ritualized displays of power, and likely communicated with deep, guttural thrums that vibrated in the chests of anything nearby. They were the ultimate expression of the dinosaurian design, a perfect balance of sensory genius and physical dominance. As the sun sets over the late Cretaceous, the silhouette of the Tyrannosaurus rex stands atop a ridge, a dark monument against a bruised purple sky. It is the master of all its surveys, the product of 150 million years of refinement. It represents the pinnacle of a world that was about to face its greatest challenge, a king whose reign was absolute, unaware that the stars above were harboring a secret that would soon bring the Age of Giants to a fiery end. But for now, the king breathes, the forest is silent, and the earth belongs to the tyrant. As the hunters reached the peak of their lethality, the world did not sit idly by. Evolution is a conversation between the eater and the eaten, and in the late Cretaceous, the plant eaters began to answer the crushing power of the tyrant with a revolution of bone and horn. This was the era of the living fortresses, a time when the peaceful harvesters transformed their bodies into heavy, impenetrable defensive systems. To walk among them was to witness a display of biological structural engineering that turned soft flesh into unyielding shields. These animals no longer relied on the safety of the deep forest or the speed of their legs. They stood their ground, daring the world to try and break them. The most iconic of these defenders were the ceratopsians, the horned faces. Imagine a creature like Triceratops, a 10-ton titan with the low-slung, powerful build of a tank. At the front of its body was a skull that was a masterpiece of both offense and defense. A massive, bony frill flared out from the back of the head, protecting the vulnerable neck from the lunging bites of a predator. This frill was more than just a shield. It was a billboard for communication, likely flushed with vibrant colors to signal health or to intimidate rivals during the mating season. From the brow and the snout erupted spears of solid bone, 3 feet long and sheathed in sharp keratin. These were not merely for show. They were functional weapons, capable of goring a predator or locking together in a wrestling match with another of its kind to determine the leader of the herd. But the armored revolution went even further. While some grew horns, others became the ultimate weightlifters of the dinosaur world. These were the ankylosaurs, the fused lizards. They were the low riders of the Cretaceous, their broad, flat bodies positioned close to the ground to prevent them from being flipped over. Every inch of their backs, from the tip of the nose to the end of the tail, was paved with a mosaic of bony plates called osteoderms. Some species even had armored eyelids and spikes jutting from their shoulders. They were the original tanks, virtually impervious to any tooth or claw. To complete the design, many possessed a heavy, bony club at the end of a stiffened tail. A single swing of this biological mace carried enough force to shatter the shin of a charging Tyrannosaurus, ending a hunt before it truly began. The evolution of armor was not just about thickness. It was about the way these animals interacted with their environment. Unlike the long-necked giants who fled into the heights, these armored dinosaurs claimed the mid-level shrubbery. They possessed powerful, beak-like mouths designed to shear through the toughest, woodiest vegetation that other animals ignored. To power their massive, armored frames, they developed wide, barrel-shaped bodies to house immense digestive systems. They were slow, deliberate, and seemingly impassive, but beneath that calm exterior lay a hair-trigger readiness. The world of a Triceratops was one of constant boundary setting, a life of checking the wind for the scent of a predator and keeping its armored head always pointed toward the threat. Inside these living forts, the biology was specialized for endurance. Their bones were incredibly dense to support the weight of their armor, and their muscle attachments were massive, giving them the strength to pivot their heavy bodies with surprising speed. A charging triceratops was not a slow-motion event. It was a multi-ton freight train of bone and muscle. Their brains, though smaller relative to the hunters, were finely tuned to social cues and spatial awareness. They lived in a world of physical contact, of nudging and pushing within the herd, and of sensory alertness to the rustle of the undergrowth. The landscape was littered with the evidence of this arms race. Fossilized frills often show the puncture marks of horns or the healed scars of a predator's bite, proving that these shields were tested time and again. It was a brutal, beautiful stalemate. For every refinement in the Tyrannosaurus's bite, the Triceratops thickened its frill. For every increase in the hunter's speed, the Ankylosaur improved the swing of its club. This dynamic created a stable, high-stakes ecosystem where life was a constant negotiation of force. The armored ones were the anchors of their world, the steady, unmoving points around which the frantic drama of the Cretaceous swirled. As the late-day sun catches the glint of a horn or the dull sheen of an armored back, we see a world that has reached a peak of complexity. The dinosaurs had solved the problem of survival in every way imaginable. They were no longer just animals. They were biological solutions to the challenge of existing on a violent, changing planet. The armored giants were the final word in that argument, a testament to the fact that in the history of life, sometimes the best way to move forward is to build a wall that nothing can tear down. The golden plains of the late Cretaceous are never truly still. Across the horizon, the Earth seems to ripple, not from the wind, but from the collective movement of thousands of bodies. This is the world of the herd, a social revolution that transformed the dinosaurs from solitary wanderers into a unified, pulsing force of nature. To look upon a great migration of hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, is to see a city in motion. These were not the silent, lonely monsters of old myths. They were highly communicative, deeply connected individuals that found in the group a level of protection and efficiency that no single animal could ever achieve. The heart of the herd was built on a foundation of sophisticated communication. The hadrosaurs, the most numerous of the social giants, possessed elaborate crests atop their heads, hollow chambers of bone that acted like the pipes of a great organ. By pushing air through these internal labyrinths, they could produce low, resonant bellows that carried for miles across the floodplains. These sounds were the language of the herd, used to signal the discovery of a lush forest, to warn of a predator's scent on the breeze, or to keep mother and calf together in the thickest fog. Every individual was part of a living network, a sensory web that stretched far beyond the reach of a single pair of eyes. Moving as a group required a complex set of unspoken rules. Fossilized trackways, frozen moments in time where the mud of an ancient riverbank turned to stone, tell the story of these processions. The largest, strongest adults walked on the outer edges, forming a living wall of muscle and bone to shield the interior. In the center, protected from the wind and the watchful eyes of hunters, walked the juveniles and the subadults. This was a tactical formation, a defensive perimeter that made it nearly impossible for a predator to isolate a weak target without facing the wrath of the entire community. The herd was a single organism with 1,000 eyes, a collective intelligence that calculated the safest paths through the changing seasons. The life of a herd animal was a journey of constant movement. They followed the rains, tracking the growth of the seasonal ferns and the flowering plants that were beginning to carpet the world in new colors. This nomadic lifestyle meant they were the great engineers of the Cretaceous landscape. As they moved, their massive weight compacted the soil, creating paths that other animals would use for generations. They cleared vast swaths of vegetation, preventing forests from becoming overgrown and allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor. They were a seasonal tide, flowing across the continents in a cycle of birth, growth, and travel that defined the rhythm of the planet. Within the herd, the social bonds were reinforced through touch and visual display. The crests weren't just for sound. They were often brilliantly patterned, serving as flags that identified which group an animal belonged to and what its status was within that group. Younger animals likely engaged in play, testing their strength in mock battles that prepared them for the rigors of adulthood. There was a sense of order, a hierarchy that ensured the most experienced individuals led the way to traditional nesting grounds or hidden water sources during times of drought. This shared memory was their greatest inheritance, passed down from one generation to the next through the simple act of walking together. The predator's view of the herd was one of frustration and opportunity. A lone tyrannosaur watching a passing group of 10,000 hadrosaurs saw a fortress it could not breach. It would follow the column for days, waiting for a moment of chaos. A river crossing where the current was too strong, a sudden storm that caused a stampede, or a lingering illness that forced a member to fall behind. The herd responded to this pressure with a collective vigilance. When one animal sensed danger and let out a warning honk, the entire group reacted as one, a shimmering wave of movement that could confuse the senses of even the most focused hunter. As the sun dips below the horizon, the herd settles for the night, the sound of thousands of rhythmic breaths filling the air like the distant hum of machinery. They are a testament to the power of the collective, a reminder that the story of the dinosaurs was not just one of teeth and claws, but of cooperation and community. In the vast, open spaces of the ancient world, the individual was vulnerable, but the herd was eternal. They lived, traveled, and survived together, their footsteps carving a legacy into the very crust of the earth, a long, winding trail of life that refused to be silenced. The cycle of life in the late Cretaceous finds its most tender expression not in the majesty of the hunt or the grandeur of the herd, but in the quiet, hidden sanctuaries of the nesting grounds. Here, the earth is scooped into hollows and mounded into protective rings, creating a vast landscape of potential. For a long time, the world imagined dinosaurs as cold, indifferent parents that abandoned their eggs to the mercy of the elements, much like a sea turtle leaving its hatchlings to the tide. But the stones tell a different story, a story of dedication, warmth, and a level of care that bridges the gap between the ancient past and the birds of today. Imagine a vast, sun-drenched plain near the edge of a slow-moving river. The ground is dotted with hundreds of carefully spaced mounds, each one a fortress for the next generation. This is a communal nursery, a place where dinosaurs gathered by the thousands to bring their young into the world. In the center of each mound lies a clutch of eggs, arranged in a precise, spiraling pattern that ensures each one receives the maximum amount of warmth and protection. These eggs are not the smooth, fragile things we find in a kitchen. They are tough, leathery, or stone-like capsules, often textured with tiny ridges that allow air to circulate even when buried under a layer of protective vegetation. The parents of these nests, particularly the mid-sized herbivores and some smaller hunters, were far from absent. We find evidence of adults remaining with their nests for weeks or months, using their own body heat to regulate the temperature of the developing embryos. In some species, the parents would meticulously turn the eggs, much like a modern bird, to ensure the growing dinosaur inside didn't stick to the shell. This was a period of intense vulnerability. While one parent stood guard, hissing at the small, egg-stealing specialists that darted through the undergrowth, the other would forage nearby, their lives revolving entirely around the silent, growing heartbeats beneath the soil. When the time finally comes for the hatching, the silence of the nesting ground is broken by a chorus of tiny, high-pitched chirps. Inside the shells, the infants use a specialized egg tooth on the tips of their snouts to crack through the mineral walls. They emerge not as miniature versions of the adults, but as awkward, big-eyed creatures with proportions that seem almost comical. Their heads are large, their limbs are spindly, and their movements are jerky and uncoordinated. But they are born with a powerful instinct to find their mother's voice. In many species, the bond was immediate. The parents would bring softened food to the nest, feeding the hatchlings until they were strong enough to leave the safety of the mound. The growth of a young dinosaur was a race against time. Because they were so small and the world was so full of predators, they had to grow at a rate that is almost difficult to comprehend. A hatchling might double or triple its size in a matter of weeks, its bones fueled by a high-octane metabolism and a constant supply of protein-rich food provided by the colony. During this time, They stayed together in creches, nurseries where the young of many different families would huddle together for warmth and safety, guarded by a few vigilant babysitter adults while the rest of the group foraged. This was the beginning of their social education, a time for learning the sounds of the herd and the scent of danger. These nesting grounds were more than just birthplaces. They were the emotional anchors of the species. Many dinosaurs returned to the exact same location year after year, guided by a deep ancestral memory. The landscape was shaped by this cycle. The vegetation around the colonies was often cropped short by the constant traffic of parents, and the soil was enriched by the remains of eggshells and the waste of the growing young. It was a place of frantic energy and profound stillness, where the future of a lineage was weighed against the harsh realities of the Cretaceous. As we watch a mother dinosaur gently nuzzling a hatchling with her snout, we see a side of these animals that defies the monster label. There is a softness here, an intelligence that understands the value of the next generation. The survival of the species depended not just on the strength of the adult's armor or the sharpness of its teeth, but on the patience and devotion shown in these mud-walled nurseries. As the sun sets over the nesting ground, casting a golden glow over the huddling young, we realize that the empire of the dinosaurs was built on a foundation of family. The great giants were once tiny, chirping shadows in the dirt, protected by the same fierce love that has defined the heart of life for millions of years. In the humid, sun-dappled forests of the mid-Cretaceous, a quiet transformation was taking place that would forever change the texture of the world. For decades, we imagined the dinosaurs as creatures of cold stone and leather, their bodies draped in a mosaic of dry, pebbled scales. But as we peel back the layers of deep time, a more vibrant and textured reality emerges. The dinosaurian world was not just a world of scales. It was a world of fluff, of bristles, and of magnificent, shimmering feathers. This was the era of the feathered revolution, a time when evolution began to experiment with a new kind of skin covering that was soft to the touch but revolutionary in its potential. This change did not begin with flight. Long before a single wing beat against the air, feathers appeared as simple, hair-like filaments called protofeathers. To a small hunter scurrying through the undergrowth, these soft fibers were a gift of insulation. They acted like a thermal blanket, trapping a layer of air against the skin to keep the animal's internal furnace burning bright during the damp, chilly nights of the coastal forests. This was the secret weapon of the small and the swift. While the giant, scaled titans relied on their sheer mass to stay warm, these feathered pioneers used their downy coats to remain active and agile in conditions that would have frozen a traditional reptile into stillness. As millions of years drifted by, these simple bristles began to branch and flatten, evolving into the complex structures we recognize today. But their purpose remained grounded. Feathers became a canvas for the most spectacular displays of color the Earth had ever seen. In a world of deep greens and earthy browns, a feathered dinosaur could be a flash of iridescent blue, a streak of fiery orange, or a pattern of striking black and white. These were the billboards of the Cretaceous, used to signal health, to attract a mate, or to intimidate a rival. A hunter might fan out a series of long, striped feathers on its arms to appear larger and more threatening, or a male might perform a rhythmic dance, his plumage shimmering in the filtered sunlight to prove his vitality. This new anatomy changed the way these animals interacted with their physical world. On the arms of some small, bird-like predators, feathers grew long and stiff, creating a flat surface that caught the wind. At first, this wasn't for flying, it was for stability. When a hunter sprinted at high speeds, leaping over fallen logs or swerving to catch a darting lizard, these proto-wings acted like the spoilers on a racing car. They provided aerodynamic lift and balance, allowing the animal to make sharper turns and more controlled landings. They were becoming masters of the air long before they ever left the ground, using the physics of the atmosphere to refine their movements on the forest floor. The texture of the Cretaceous was thus much softer than we once believed. Imagine a mother dinosaur brooding her nest, not with cold scales, but by tucking her eggs beneath a warm, feathered breast, much like a modern bird. Imagine the sound of a forest filled with the soft rustle of plumage against fern fronds, a sound far removed from the dry clacking of scales. This transition was a bridge between two worlds. It was the moment when the dinosaurian lineage began to soften its edges, trading the heavy armor of the past for the lightweight, high-performance gear of the future. Inside these feathers, the biology was as complex as the structures themselves. They were made of keratin, the same resilient material as claws and horns, but woven into a lattice that was incredibly light and strong. This lightness allowed dinosaurs to experiment with elaborate crests and long, flowing tail plumes that didn't weigh them down. It was a victory of form and function. By the time the first true flight feathers appeared, the dinosaurs had already spent tens of millions of years perfecting the chemistry and the growth patterns of plumage. They had mastered the art of staying warm and the art of being seen. As the sun catches the iridescent sheen on the back of a small, feathered hunter, we see a creature that is no longer just a reptile in the old sense of the word. It is something new, something vibrant, and something remarkably familiar. The feathers were not an afterthought. They were a fundamental shift in the dinosaurian identity. They represented a move toward a more energetic, more visual, and more connected way of living. The sky was still the domain of the leathery-winged pterosaurs, but on the ground, the architects of the future were already wearing the uniform of the heavens. The feathered dinosaurs were a promise of things to come, a soft, shimmering sign that the Earth was preparing for its next great leap. The transition from the forest floor to the vast, open sky did not happen with a single, desperate leap. It was a slow, graceful drift that took place over millions of years, a story of small, feathered dinosaurs that gradually found themselves more at home in the air than on the dirt. This was the quiet birth of birds, a lineage that began not as a departure from the dinosaurian world, but as its most specialized and enduring branch. To see the first bird-like dinosaurs is to see the familiar features of a predator. The sharp teeth, the long, bony tail, and the clawed hands, slowly melting into a form that could harness the invisible power of the wind. The journey upward began with the arms. In the small, agile hunters of the Cretaceous, the bones of the wrist were changing, developing a half-moon shape that allowed the hand to fold back against the forearm. This was the flight stroke before flight even existed. It was originally used to tuck the long, feathered arms away while running through dense brush, or perhaps to snap the hands forward with lightning speed to snatch a dragonfly from the air. But this motion, born from the need to hunt, accidentally created the perfect mechanical foundation for a wing. As the feathers on these arms grew longer and more asymmetrical, they began to generate a tiny amount of lift. At first, it was just enough to help a dinosaur flap its way up a steep tree trunk to escape a larger predator, or to glide a few yards from a high branch to the forest floor. Inside their chests, another revolution was occurring. To power the intense, calorie-burning act of flapping, these animals needed a heart and lungs of unprecedented efficiency. They inherited the one-way breathing system of their larger ancestors, but they refined it, packing their small bodies with air sacs that acted like bellows. This kept a constant stream of fresh oxygen flowing through their blood, even during the most strenuous activity. Their bones, already light, became even more delicate, fused together in key places to provide a rigid, lightweight frame that could withstand the stresses of flight. The heavy, bony tail of the traditional dinosaur began to shrink, eventually becoming a short, fleshy stump that supported a fan of feathers used for steering. This was not a world of missing links, but a world of overlapping identities. For a long time, there were creatures that were half dinosaur and half bird, possessing the snout of a reptile but the wings of an eagle. They lived in the coastal lagoons and the high mountain forests, filling the air with a new kind of sound, the frantic, rhythmic whistling of wings. They were still hunters, using their tiny, needle-sharp teeth to catch fish or insects, and their clawed wings to scramble up bark. But they were discovering a new dimension. The sky offered a sanctuary that the ground could not provide, a way to travel hundreds of miles to follow the seasons, and a vantage point that made the world's dangers seem small and distant. As these pioneers took to the air, they didn't just leave the Earth behind. They took the best of the dinosaurian design with them. Their high metabolism, their keen eyesight, and their complex social behaviors were all pre-adaptations that made them the perfect candidates for the aerial life. They were the survivors of an evolutionary gamble, trading size and raw power for the freedom of the heavens. While the giant tyrannosaurs and the armored triceratops were locked into their roles as the masters of the land, these small, feathered aviators were quietly building a global empire that would outlast the giants by 66 million years. The landscape they looked down upon was changing. The first flowering plants were beginning to bloom, and the birds were among the first to exploit this new resource, developing beaks of different shapes to sip nectar or crack seeds. They were becoming the messengers of the ecosystem, carrying life from one island to the next. The birth of birds was the ultimate proof of the dinosaurs' versatility. It showed that the dinosaurian blueprint wasn't just about being a monster. It was about being a survivor. As the sun set over a Cretaceous lagoon, the silhouette of a feathered flyer against the orange sky was a signal that the legacy of the dinosaurs would never truly disappear. They were simply changing their shape, preparing to carry the spirit of the Mesozoic into a future they could not yet imagine. The world the dinosaurs walked through was a living, breathing tapestry of color and texture that shifted with the slow, grinding movement of the continents. To stand in the heart of the Cretaceous was to be immersed in a landscape that was both hauntingly familiar and deeply alien. The air was not the thin, dry air of a textbook illustration. It was thick, humid, and heavy with the scent of life. It smelled of rotting wood, of damp earth, and for the first time in the history of the planet, the sweet, heady fragrance of flowers. This was a world in the midst of a floral revolution, where the somber greens of the ancient gymnosperms were being challenged by a sudden, vibrant explosion of petals and fruit. In the early mornings, the valleys were often choked with a dense, white fog that clung to the fronds of giant ferns. These ferns were the carpets of the dinosaur world, growing in vast, emerald meadows that reached as high as a man's waist. Above them towered the ancient masters of the forest, the conifers and the ginkgos. These trees were giants in their own right, their trunks thick with rugged, fire-resistant bark and their branches draped in long tresses of moss. There were no grassy plains as we know them today. Grass had not yet evolved to dominate the earth. Instead, the open spaces were filled with low-growing shrubs, cycads with their stiff, waxy crowns, and the first primitive magnolias that offered a splash of white and pink against the monochromatic green. The rivers were the arteries of this world, slow-moving and silver, carving deep paths through the soft, sedimentary plains. They were flanked by dense galleries of horsetails, tall, segmented plants that looked like green bamboo and hissed in the wind. These waterways were not just places to drink. They were complex ecosystems teeming with life. Giant turtles with shells as broad as tabletops basked on half-submerged logs, and freshwater rays glided through the silt. The seasons were marked by the rising and falling of these waters. During the monsoon months, the rivers would burst their banks, turning the forests into vast, shallow lakes and depositing layers of rich, gray mud that would eventually become the stone tombs of the animals that lived there. As the day progressed and the sun climbed higher, the temperature would soar. The Cretaceous was a greenhouse world, with carbon dioxide levels that kept the planet warm from pole to pole. There were no ice caps in this era. Even at the far reaches of the north and south, lush forests grew where today there is only ice. This global warmth meant that the dinosaurs were never truly restricted by the cold. They could wander from the equator to the high latitudes, following the seasonal growth of the plants. The heat was a constant, shimmering presence, creating a world of high energy where life moved at a frantic pace. In the deep interior of the continents, the landscape was harsher. Far from the cooling influence of the oceans, the land was a mosaic of dry woodlands and seasonal floodplains. Here, the plants had to be tougher. They developed thorns, thick cuticles, and deep roots to survive the long, hot months without rain. When the storms did come, they were violent and sudden, turning the dry ravines into roaring torrents of mud and debris. This was a world of pulses, a rhythm of drought followed by abundance, where the survival of a herd depended on its ability to read the sky and move toward the scent of distant rain. The light in this world had a different quality than our own, because the atmosphere was thick with volcanic ash and high levels of moisture. The sunsets were often spectacular, bruised palettes of deep violet, fiery orange, and dusty gold. This light filtered through a canopy that was always changing. As the first broadleaf trees began to appear, the shadows on the forest floor became more complex, dappled with light in a way that provided perfect camouflage for the mottled skin and feathered coats of the hunters. The environment was not just a backdrop. It was a participant in the story of evolution, shaping the senses and the behaviors of every creature that moved through it. As night fell, the sounds of the landscape took over. The wind through the needles of the pines, the distant rumble of a volcano, and the persistent, high-pitched drone of insects that were learning to feed on the nectar of the new flowers. It was a world of immense beauty and constant change, a planet that was reaching the height of its biological complexity. The dinosaurs were the masters of this terrain, but they were also its products, molded by the rivers, the forests, and the shifting heat of a world that was at the peak of its glory. The stage was vast, the scenery was magnificent, and every leaf and stone played a part in the grand, unfolding drama of the Mesozoic. In the deep stillness of the ancient world, it is easy to imagine a realm of silence, a place where the only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the distant roar of thunder. But the world of the dinosaurs was a vibrant, noisy theater, a place where communication was a vital currency for survival. They lived in a landscape of high-definition signals, using a language of color, posture, and sound that was as complex as any we see in the modern world. For a dinosaur, to be silent was often to be invisible, and in a world where you needed to find a mate, defend a territory, or warn a family of danger, invisibility was a luxury few could afford. The most direct form of communication was written into the very architecture of their bodies. We have seen the great bony crests of the duck-billed dinosaurs, those hollow, winding chambers that acted like acoustic resonators. When a hadrosaur pushed air through its head, it didn't just make a noise. It created a low-frequency thrum that could be felt in the bones of other animals miles away. These sounds were below the threshold of human hearing, a secret language of the giants. In the dense Cretaceous forests, where the foliage was too thick to see more than a few yards, these deep bellows allowed herds to stay coordinated, moving together like a single, massive organism. A specific call might signal a safe watering hole, while a sharp, percussive hoot could send the entire group into a defensive huddle. But sound was only half the story. The dinosaurs lived in a world of brilliant, shifting colors. For a long time, we pictured them in drab grays and muddy browns, but the discovery of pigment-carrying cells in fossilized feathers and scales has revealed a rainbow of possibilities. The great frills of the horned dinosaurs, the plates of the armored tanks, and the sweeping fans of the feathered hunters were likely painted in bold patterns of crimson, electric blue, and striking yellow. These were the billboards of the Mesozoic. A flash of a brightly colored tail could be a signal to follow me, while a sudden display of a vibrant neck frill was a biological stop sign, warning arrival that a fight was imminent. Visual communication also involved the subtle art of body language. A Tyrannosaurus didn't always need to roar to show its dominance. A low, slow tilt of the head, a stiffening of the tail, or a rhythmic drumming of the feet on the dry earth could communicate a wealth of information to another of its kind. They were masters of the display, ritualized movements that allowed them to resolve conflicts without the risk of a physical fight. Two rivals might spend hours circling one another, puffing out their chests and swaying their necks. A tense dance of intimidation that only ended when one individual acknowledged the other's superior size or vigor. For the smaller, feathered dinosaurs, communication was even more intricate. They used their plumage not just for warmth, but as a sophisticated signaling system. A small hunter might have long, iridescent feathers on its arms that it would fan out during a courtship dance, the light catching the feathers to create a shimmering, metallic effect. They likely used rhythmic chirps and whistles, much like modern birds, to claim nesting sites or to keep in touch with their young. This vocal culture meant that the forests were never truly quiet. They were filled with the clicks, hisses, and trills of creatures that were constantly negotiating their place in the social order. In the shadows of the night, communication shifted to the senses of smell and touch. Many dinosaurs possessed large olfactory bulbs, and they likely used scent markings to define the boundaries of their territories. A rub of the neck against a charred conifer trunk or a scrape of the claws in the dirt could leave behind a chemical signature that lasted for days, telling any passerby exactly who owned that patch of forest and how healthy they were. Within families, touch was a powerful bond. A mother nuzzling her hatchlings, or members of a herd leaning against one another during a storm, reinforced the social ties that kept them alive. As we look back at this world, we must see it as a place of constant, meaningful interaction. The dinosaurs were not just biological machines eating and sleeping. They were social beings that lived in a world of information. They spoke through the air, through the light, and through the very ground beneath their feet. Every crest, every feather, and every low-frequency rumble was a thread in a vast, invisible web of communication that held their society together. The silent world was, in reality, a symphony of life, a place where every creature had a voice and every signal was a heartbeat in the grand drama of the Cretaceous. In the unforgiving light of the Cretaceous sun, the majesty of the dinosaurs was often tempered by a quiet, persistent reality, the struggle for physical survival. To look at a fossil is to see more than just a magnificent skeleton. It is to see a diary of a life lived on the edge. The bones of these giants are etched with the stories of their resilience. The deep grooves of healed fractures, the pitted textures of ancient infections, and the scarred surfaces where muscle once tore away from the frame. Life in the ancient world was not a series of perfect, unblemished days. It was a grueling marathon of endurance where the body was constantly under siege from the environment, from rivals, and from the microscopic world of disease. Injury was a constant companion for the active dinosaur. For a multi-ton herbivore, a simple trip in a muddy riverbed or a stumble during a frantic stampede could result in a splintered rib or a cracked limb. In the fossil record, we find remarkable evidence of these animals' ability to survive and heal. We see massive leg bones that were once snapped clean through, only to be fused back together by thick, knobby growths of new bone called callus. These animals did not have the luxury of rest. A limping hadrosaur still had to keep pace with the herd to stay safe, and a wounded triceratops still had to face the wind. The presence of these healed wounds tells us of a biological toughness that is almost difficult to fathom, a drive to keep moving even when the very structure of the body had been compromised. The predators faced an even more dangerous path. Every hunt was a high-stakes gamble with their own physical integrity. A Tyrannosaurus lunging for a meal might find its face lashed by the horns of a defender or its shins shattered by the swing of an armored tail. We find skulls of these great hunters marked by the gouges of their own kind's teeth, suggesting brutal fights over territory or mates. Yet, many of these combat wounds show clear signs of healing, indicating that these predators were not easily discouraged. They lived with chronic pain, their bodies acting as a living record of every victory and every narrow escape. This resilience was fueled by a high-octane metabolism that could divert massive amounts of energy toward the repair of tissue and bone, turning the body into a self-mending machine. Beyond the visible scars of battle, there were the hidden enemies, bacteria and parasites. The humid, greenhouse world of the Cretaceous was a paradise for microscopic life. Dinosaurs likely suffered from a range of ailments that would be familiar to us today: respiratory infections that whistled in their air sacs, bone cancers that warped their skeletons, and blood-borne parasites carried by the clouds of biting insects that swarmed the riverbanks. Some fossils show evidence of lumpy jaw, a devastating bone infection that could make eating nearly impossible. In these ancient bones, we see the microscopic evidence of the body's immune system fighting back, a silent war waged in the marrow and the blood long before the first humans ever walked the earth. As these animals aged, they faced the same slow decline that haunts all living things. Their joints would grow stiff with arthritis, the smooth cartilage wearing thin until bone ground against bone with every step. Their teeth, though constantly replaced throughout their lives, might fail to keep up with the wear and tear of a gritty, fibrous diet. An elderly dinosaur was a vulnerable dinosaur, an individual that relied more than ever on the protection of the herd or the wisdom gained over decades of survival. The story of these senior dinosaurs is one of the most poignant in paleontology. It reveals a world where life was cherished and defended until the very end, and where the experience of an old leader might mean the difference between life and death for the entire group. This constant dance with death shaped the very behavior of the dinosaurs. It made them cautious, social, and fiercely protective of their young. It turned the landscape into a map of risks and rewards. A dinosaur didn't just see a forest. It saw a place where a hidden root could break a toe, or where a stagnant pool might hold a deadly sickness. Their lives were a testament to the power of the biological will to live, a force that pushed them to heal, to adapt, and to endure in a world that never stopped testing them. As the dusk falls over a scarred and weary predator resting in the ferns, we see the true nature of their dominance. It wasn't just about size or speed. It was about the ability to take a hit and keep standing. The dinosaurs were the champions of the long game, their bodies a testament to 100 million years of successful repair and recovery. They were the ultimate survivors, carrying the marks of their struggle with a quiet, unyielding dignity, proving that in the history of life, the greatest strength is not the absence of injury, but the courage to heal and move on. The transition between the heights of the Cretaceous and the beginning of its end was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, restless stirring of the Earth itself. For millions of years, the world had been a greenhouse, a stable paradise of warmth and humidity. But as the clock of deep time ticked forward, the very foundations of the planet began to shift. This was a world in the grip of a slow-motion fever. Deep beneath the ocean floor and in the heart of the great land masses, the tectonic plates were pulling apart with a renewed, violent energy. This internal pressure found its release in a series of volcanic eruptions so vast and persistent that they dwarfed anything the human mind can imagine. In the region we now know as India, the earth cracked open, bleeding rivers of molten basalt that flooded the landscape for thousands of miles. These were not the explosive, cone-shaped volcanoes of postcards, but gargantuan fissures that spilled liquid fire day and night for centuries at a time. This constant volcanic activity began to pump a relentless stream of carbon dioxide and sulfur into the atmosphere. The sky, once a brilliant blue, began to take on a persistent, hazy yellow tint. The sun, though still bright, felt different. Its light filtered through a veil of microscopic ash that lingered in the upper atmosphere, cooling some regions while trapping heat in others. The global climate, once a predictable rhythm of seasons, began to wobble. The dinosaurs, so perfectly adapted to the stability of the mid-Cretaceous, were the first to feel the stress of this changing world. The plants were the heralds of the crisis. As the chemistry of the air shifted and the rains became more acidic, the ancient forests began to thin. The lush, predictable meadows of ferns and horsetails were being replaced by hardier, more aggressive flowering plants and broadleaf trees that could better handle the fluctuating temperatures. For the giant long-necked sauropods, whose entire existence was built on the availability of massive quantities of specific soft vegetation, this was a disaster in slow motion. We see their numbers begin to dwindle in the fossil record, their vast territories shrinking as the greenhouse they thrived in became an oven that periodically spiked in temperature. The oceans, too, were in turmoil. As the climate warmed, the great inland seaways that had once divided the continents began to retreat. The vast, shallow epicontinental seas, warm, sunlit waters that had supported a staggering diversity of life, were draining away as the land rose and the ocean basins shifted. This caused a massive loss of coastal habitat. The grand, swampy deltas where many dinosaurs nested were drying up, replaced by jagged coastlines and unpredictable estuaries. The retreating waters also changed the way heat was distributed around the globe. The great thermal conveyor belt of the oceans was slowing down, leading to more extreme weather patterns. Hurricanes of unprecedented power began to lash the coastlines, and inland, the droughts grew longer and more punishing. This was an era of biological exhaustion. The dinosaurs were not dying out, but they were under immense pressure. The diversity of species began to narrow. The specialized, niche-dwelling animals were the first to fade, leaving behind only the most resilient and generalized survivors. The social structures of the herds were being tested by the scarcity of resources. Migrations that had once been a predictable journey toward food became desperate gambles across parched landscapes. The predators, in turn, found their prey becoming more erratic and difficult to find. Every aspect of the ecosystem was being stretched to its breaking point, like a rubber band pulled tighter and tighter by the invisible hands of geology and climate. Despite these warning signs, life continued with a fierce, stubborn beauty. The dinosaurs were still the undisputed masters of the land, evolving new forms even as the old ones vanished. The armored tanks became even more heavily defended, and the hunters became even more intelligent. They were unaware that the ground beneath their feet was a ticking clock. The volcanic haze, the retreating seas, and the changing forests were merely the opening act of a drama that was about to reach a terrifying crescendo. The Earth was in the midst of a transformation, a shedding of its old skin, and while the giants still walked the Earth with confidence, the environment was quietly withdrawing its support for their reign. The atmosphere of this time was one of heavy, waiting tension. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and the dust of a changing world. At night, the volcanoes on the horizon painted the underside of the clouds in a dull, bruised red, a reminder that the planet was no longer a silent partner in the story of life. The dinosaurs had survived 100 million years of challenges, but they had never faced a world that was changing this fast, on so many fronts at once. They were the kings of a crumbling castle, magnificent and formidable, but increasingly out of sync with a planet that was moving on without them. The era of stability was over. The era of the fragile edge had begun. The world was now standing on a knife's edge. In the final few 100,000 years of the Cretaceous, the planet felt like an engine running too hot for too long. The instability that had begun with the volcanic fires of the Deccan was now a permanent feature of existence. To walk through a forest in this era was to see a landscape in a state of high alert. The seasons had become jagged and cruel. A winter of unexpected, killing frost might be followed by a summer of such blistering, airless heat that the rivers simply vanished into cracked mud. This was a world of biological warning signs, where the great tapestry of life was beginning to fray at the edges, one thread at a time. The dinosaurs were still there, still magnificent, but the diversity of their world was thinning. Where once a dozen different species of long-necked giants might have shared a continent, now there were only one or two. The specialized feeders, those animals that had evolved to eat only one kind of fern or live in only one kind of swamp, were disappearing as their homes changed beyond recognition. This narrowing of the gene pool was a silent alarm. It meant that the ecosystem was losing its resilience. Like a building that has had too many of its support beams removed, the world of the dinosaurs was still standing, but it could no longer withstand a sudden shock. In the undergrowth, the small things were already beginning to pivot. The mammals, those furry, scurrying shadows that had lived in the periphery for over 100 million years, were diversifying. They were small enough to hide from the temperature extremes and flexible enough to eat almost anything. Insects, roots, rotting fruit, even the occasional dinosaur egg. They were the maintenance crew of a dying era, thriving in the chaos that was stressing the giants. Beside them, the birds were also flourishing, their ability to fly allowing them to escape local disasters and find pockets of plenty in a world of scarcity. These smaller, high-energy survivors were the quiet witnesses to the mounting stress of the giants. The oceans were echoing this terrestrial instability. The retreat of the inland seas had reached a critical point. The vast, shallow waterways that once acted as nurseries for marine life were now gone, replaced by deep, cold oceans that didn't support the same abundance of fish and mollusks. This collapse at the base of the food chain rippled upward. The great marine reptiles, the long-necked plesiosaurs and the terrifying mosasaurs, were finding it harder to find enough calories to sustain their massive bodies. The very chemistry of the water was changing, becoming more acidic as it absorbed the volcanic gases from the atmosphere, making it difficult for the tiny plankton to build their shells. The heartbeat of the ocean was slowing down. On land, the social behavior of the dinosaurs was becoming more desperate. The great nesting grounds, once places of predictable life and growth, were becoming scenes of struggle. Changes in soil temperature and moisture meant that many eggs failed to hatch, or produced hatchlings that were too weak to survive their first week. We see evidence in the fossil record of pathological eggshells, shells that were too thin or too thick, a physical manifestation of the mother's stress and the changing environment. The herds had to travel further and further to find water, their traditional migration routes cut off by new mountains or dried-up riverbeds. The king, the Tyrannosaurus, followed these struggling herds, but even the king was finding the world increasingly empty. The atmosphere itself felt heavy with a sense of impending change. The air was a thick soup of dust, ash, and water vapor. The light that reached the ground was often a sickly, diffused amber, casting long, strange shadows through the thinning forests. The flowering plants, the newest arrivals on the evolutionary stage, were the only things that seemed to be winning. They were tougher and faster than the ancient ferns, colonizing the scorched earth left behind by forest fires and droughts. They were the future, but they were a future that the giant herbivores had not yet fully adapted to eat. There was a strange, haunting beauty in this fragile world. It was a masterpiece that had been running for 160 million years, now reaching its final strained notes. The dinosaurs were not a failure. They were a triumph of longevity and adaptation. But they were locked into a system that was fundamentally breaking. The relationship between the sun, the air, the water, and the soil, the contract that had allowed the giants to rule, was being rewritten by the Earth's own internal fires. As the sun sets on the final days of the Cretaceous, it shines on a world that is exhausted but still standing. The Tyrannosaurus still bellows into the hazy dusk. The Triceratops still guards its dwindling herd. The last of the sauropods still reaches for the highest leaves. They are the masters of a realm that is about to vanish, the actors in a play that has run for an eternity and is now only seconds away from the final curtain. They do not know that the stars are watching. They do not know that a mountain of rock and ice is screaming through the vacuum of space, aimed directly at the heart of their world. They are simply living, breathing, and enduring, the final, magnificent guardians of a world on the edge of the abyss. The end did not begin with a slow decline, but with a light that outshone the sun. On a day that started like any other in the late Cretaceous, the sky over the ancient Gulf of Mexico was suddenly torn open by a streak of blinding, white-hot fire. It was an asteroid the size of a mountain, 10 kilometers across, traveling at 40 times the speed of sound. It did not simply fall. It punched through the atmosphere with such violence that it compressed the air beneath it into a plasma hotter than the surface of the sun. In a heartbeat, the oxygen itself ignited. For the dinosaurs looking up from the coastal plains, there was no time for fear. There was only a flash, and then the world as they knew it ceased to exist. When the mountain of rock struck the shallow sea, it did not stop at the water. It slammed into the Earth's crust with the energy of 1 billion atomic bombs, vaporizing miles of solid rock and seawater instantly. The impact created a crater over 100 miles wide, throwing a colossal plume of molten glass, sulfur, and pulverized Earth back out into space. This was the ejecta, a curtain of fire that rose above the atmosphere before falling back to Earth. As these billions of red-hot glass droplets re-entered the air, they acted like a global broiler. Across every continent, the sky turned a hellish, glowing red. The sheer heat from the falling debris ignited the forests of the world simultaneously. From the redwood groves of the north to the fern prairies of the south, the Earth became a global furnace. For the animals far from the impact site, the horror arrived in stages. First came the light, then the heat, and then the ground itself began to scream. The impact triggered mega-earthquakes that rippled through the planet's crust, bucking the land with such force that entire mountain ranges shuddered. In the oceans, the displacement of water created tsunamis hundreds of feet high, walls of black water and mud that surged inland for miles, erasing the coastal deltas and drowning the nesting grounds of the giants. In the rivers, the water boiled. In the forests, the air became a hurricane of fire, as the pressure wave from the impact leveled trees for thousands of miles in every direction. But the fire was only the beginning. As the initial heat subsided, a terrifying and absolute darkness began to descend. The impact had vaporized vast amounts of gypsum rock, releasing billions of tons of sulfur into the upper atmosphere. This, combined with the soot from the global forest fires and the dust of the pulverized crust, formed an impenetrable shroud around the planet. The sun, the source of all life for the dinosaurian empire, was blotted out. For months, and then years, the Earth fell into a deep, freezing twilight known as an impact winter. The temperatures plummeted. The tropical paradise of the Cretaceous was replaced by a landscape of frost and ash. Without sunlight, the plants, the foundation of everything the dinosaurs had built, began to wither and die. The collapse of the food chain was rapid and merciless. The great long-necked sauropods, the titans that required hundreds of pounds of greenery every day, were the first to fall. They wandered through the ash-choked forests, their massive hearts struggling to pump blood in the bitter cold, finding only dry stalks and charcoal where lush ferns once grew. As the herbivores vanished, the hunters followed. The Tyrannosaurus, the king of the world only days before, now found itself a ghost in a graveyard. Its keen senses, once used for the hunt, now only tracked the scent of decay. The great herds were gone. The communication, the social bonds, and the millions of years of evolutionary refinement could not save them from a world that had suddenly run out of energy. The air became acidic as the sulfur in the atmosphere mixed with moisture, falling as a toxic rain that poisoned the remaining lakes and scorched the few plants that had survived the fires. In the oceans, the disappearance of plankton led to a total breakdown of marine life. The great sea reptiles, the masters of the deep, starved in the darkness. The world was silent, save for the howling of the wind through the skeletons of dead forests. It was a biological reset, a moment where the complexity of the Mesozoic was stripped away, leaving only the barest bones of life. Yet, in the shadows of this apocalypse, something was stirring. Deep in the burrows beneath the scorched earth, and in the hollows of fallen logs, the small and the resilient were waiting. The mammals, the birds, and the creatures of the water, those who could scavenge on the debris of the old world, were the only ones with a chance. They were the heirs to a kingdom of ash. The age of the giants was over, not because they were weak, but because the rules of the game had changed overnight. The asteroid had not just killed the dinosaurs, it had ended an entire way of being. As the soot slowly began to settle and the first cold, pale light of a new sun touched the gray earth, the landscape was empty of the magnificent shadows that had defined it for an eternity. The giants were gone, and the world belonged to the small. The world that emerged from the long, frozen night of the impact winter was a ghost of its former self. The air was thin and sharp, carrying the bitter scent of wet ash and stagnant water. Where once the horizon had been dominated by the massive, rhythmic silhouettes of sauropods, there was now only a vast, empty stillness. The great forests were gone, replaced by a landscape of charred timber and a creeping carpet of ferns, the only plants hardy enough to reclaim the scorched earth in the first few centuries. This was the dawn of the Paleocene, a time of profound mourning for the lost giants, but also a time of frantic, desperate new beginnings. The earth was a blank canvas, and the survivors were few. Among the ruins, the birds were the first to find their footing, because they were essentially small, feathered dinosaurs that had already mastered the art of flight and high-speed metabolism. They possessed the tools to navigate a broken world. They could fly over the zones of total destruction to find pockets of life that had survived the fires. Their beaks, originally designed for seeds or insects, were perfect for scavenging the remains of the old world. In the absence of the great pterosaurs, who had vanished alongside the land giants, the birds took to the skies with a new sense of ownership. They were the living memory of the dinosaurian lineage, the small, chirping sparks that would keep the fire of the Mesozoic burning in a cold new era. Beneath the soil, the mammals were experiencing their own revolution. For over 100 million years, they had been the shadow dwellers, restricted to the night and the undergrowth by the dominance of the dinosaurs. But the asteroid had removed the ceiling. With the great predators gone, the small, furry survivors found themselves in a world without masters. They emerged from their burrows into a landscape of infinite opportunity. They began to grow, to diversify, and to explore the daylight. At first, they were no larger than a cat, but in the vacuum left by the tyrannosaurs and the triceratops, they began to experiment with size and diet. The age of mammals was not a sudden conquest. It was a slow, tentative expansion into the empty niches of a fallen empire. The oceans were equally transformed. The death of the great marine reptiles had left the seas quiet and eerily blue. The sharks, those ancient survivors who had seen the rise and fall of countless dynasties, remained, but the middle of the food chain was being rebuilt by new kinds of fish and eventually, by the ancestors of whales who would return to the water from the land. The coral reefs, once vibrant and bustling, were slow to recover, but the microscopic life, the plankton, was beginning to bloom again, fueled by the nutrients washed into the sea by the global rains. The chemistry of the water was stabilizing, and the pulse of the deep was returning, though the music was different now. This era was characterized by a strange, quiet resilience. Life did not return to its former glory overnight. It was a world of pioneer species, tough, opportunistic plants and animals that thrived on disturbance. The flowering plants, which had been the newest arrivals in the Cretaceous, now became the dominant force. They evolved fruits and nuts to entice the surviving birds and mammals to spread their seeds, creating a new kind of partnership that would define the future of the planet. The forests that grew back were not the somber, ancient groves of conifers, but vibrant, leafy woodlands that changed with the seasons in a way the dinosaur world never had. The memory of the dinosaurs lingered in the very structure of the new ecosystems. The paths the great herds had carved through the continents for millions of years were often the same routes the new mammals followed. The seeds the dinosaurs had once spread now fed the ancestors of horses and elephants. The world was built on the bones of the giants, quite literally. Their fossilized remains became the mineral foundation of the new soil, and their absence shaped the behavior of every creature that followed. A mammal didn't have to look over its shoulder for a tyrannosaur anymore, but that lack of fear changed the way it moved, the way it hunted, and the way it evolved. As the millennia passed, the gray world turned green again. The soot was buried under layers of new sediment, and the sky returned to a clear, brilliant blue. The after was not a replacement of the before, but a continuation of the same story in a different key. The dinosaurs had not been erased. They had been refined. In every hawk that circled the new forests, and in every songbird that greeted the Paleocene dawn, the spirit of the theropods lived on. The giants had vanished, but the design, the metabolism, the vision, the intelligence had survived the fire. The world was new, but it was still a dinosaur's world at heart, a legacy written in feathers and bone that refused to be silenced by the stars. To look upon the world today is to walk among the ghosts of a lost empire. Yet the more we look, the more we realize those ghosts never truly left us. We exist in a brief moment of a very long story, a narrative that stretched for 160 million years before our kind ever drew breath. The dinosaurs are often spoken of in the past tense, as failures of evolution or relics of a forgotten time. But that is perhaps the greatest misunderstanding of our history. They were the most successful explorers of the land the Earth has ever known, and their legacy is woven into the very fabric of our modern lives, visible in every backyard and etched into the very stones beneath our feet. The most profound legacy of the dinosaurs is the one that flies above our heads. When you watch a sparrow hop across a lawn or a hawk circle on a thermal, you are not looking at a relative of the dinosaurs, you are looking at a dinosaur. Every bird on the planet today, from the smallest hummingbird to the largest ostrich, is a living member of the theropod lineage. They carry the same lightened, air-filled bones, the same efficient one-way breathing system, and the same fierce, focused intelligence that once belonged to the hunters of the Cretaceous. They have simply traded the heavy tail and the toothy jaw for the grace of flight and the precision of the beak. The dinosaurian experiment didn't end in the fire of the asteroid. It was distilled into the most diverse and successful group of land vertebrates alive today. But the legacy is also hidden in the deep earth. For nearly 200 years, we have been prying the story of the giants from the stone, using brushes and chisels to reveal the architecture of a world we can only dream of. Every fossil we find is a piece of a magnificent puzzle, a bridge of bone that connects us to the deep time of our planet. Science has moved beyond the simple assembly of skeletons. We can now look at the microscopic structure of their cells, determine the colors of their feathers, and calculate the force of their bite with mathematical precision. We are beginning to see them not as monsters, but as vibrant, social, and complex beings that face the same challenges of life, love, and survival that we do. This journey into the past changes the way we see the present. It teaches us about the fragility of our own world and the resilience of life. The dinosaurs survived for an unimaginable length of time, weathering volcanic eruptions, shifting continents, and radical climate changes. They show us that the Earth is a dynamic, living system where the only constant is change. Their story is a reminder that no reign is eternal, but also that no ending is absolute. Life is a river that flows around every obstacle, changing its shape but never losing its momentum. There is a poetic beauty in the realization that we share our planet with the descendants of the king. When we hear the song of a bird at dawn, we are hearing a refined version of the vocalizations that echoed through the fern forests of the Jurassic. When we look into the keen, lateral eye of a crow, we are seeing the same gaze that once tracked the movements of a herd on the Pangaean plains. The scale has changed, but the spirit remains. We are the stewards of a world that was once theirs, living in the quiet interlude of a story that is still being written. As we stand on the edge of a new era, looking out over a landscape shaped by millions of years of life and death, we feel the weight of deep time. The dinosaurs represent the sheer scale of what is possible on this planet. They remind us that the Earth can produce giants, that it can survive fire and darkness, and that it can reinvent itself again and again. Their story is our story, a testament to the enduring power of life to find a way, to adapt, and to soar. As the sun sets on our own day, casting long shadows that mimic the shapes of the ancient ones, we can take comfort in the knowledge that we are part of this grand, unfolding epic. The giants may have vanished, but their world remains, vibrant and alive, a living monument to the majesty of the Mesozoic.